Excellent. Alrighty. Well, hi, everybody. I guess want to move on to our next slide. Great.
Absolutely. As things don't work the way that we
There we go.
There
Okay.
we go. Welcome, everybody. My name is Erika Lewis, and I go by she, her pronouns or he, him pronouns in certain spaces. I worked very closely with Erin at Canopy Studios as a technical lead, a WordPress technical lead. I have been working in technical spaces since about 2002. I've had a lot of different hats, including a designer and a developer. I've done everything from packaging to web design to being a technical lead for the Canopy organization. I identify as a queer person of color. I've been married to my wife for 6 years next month. Very excited about that.
Congrats.
I'm here because I would like to see more people who look like me in tech positions, and I'm willing to advocate for it.
Excellent. I am Erin Linkins. My pronouns are she, her, or they, them. I am Canopy's Director of HR, and I've worked for and with Canopy and other agencies for, since the late 90s, but for Canopy specifically for about 5 years almost. And I have been working with agencies in the creative and tech space, both as a recruiter and an HR person throughout my career. I am a queer person with a disability. I'm also sober as well, so I've got a couple of things going on there. And I'm here because the last few years for me have really illuminated a lot of things about my own blind spots personally and professionally, and I'd love to pass on those learnings. All right, so in having conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we feel that it's important to acknowledge a few things. So Erika and I are going to talk about very specific lived experiences, but we also want to recognize that when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're speaking about the intersection of many things. So age, race, gender nonconformity, sexual orientation, folks with disabilities, neurodiversity, many other nuanced groups of folks that I haven't mentioned and I may not mention. So if we don't name all of those things today or speak to their experiences specifically, it's not because we're not thinking about them or considering them. Additionally, we just want to say straight up, we're not always going to do this right, but we're willing to be honest about our own privilege and our own experience as it was shaped by that privilege. We are open to difficult feedback always and having hard conversations. We're open to being wrong. We're open to apologizing for the things we say that are problematic or hurtful. And we're open to educating ourselves about those things and continuing to educate ourselves to do better.
So when we talk about diversity, inclusion, and equity, the best way to really illustrate it is to imagine a room with the table in the center and the company's leadership is sitting at that table. And diversity is inviting a group of different people into the room. Inclusion is inviting those people to sit at the table. But equity is ensuring that all the folks at the table have the conditions they need to have an equal voice and be equally heard. So I want to talk a little bit about my personal experiences as a queer person of color, as a woman, and specifically a Black woman, which I think is important to point out because all experiences for people of color are not the same. So for specifically as a Black woman, looking for jobs in the workplace, I know off the bat, especially in tech, that I am more than likely going to be a minority unless I specifically apply to Black or POC owned companies. I just know that is just a known factor going into any job search. And and knowing when I apply for any job, I'm not just a woman. I'm again a Black queer woman, and that matters, and it matters a lot to me, and it should matter to my employers. I want to feel safe and to be able to ask questions or discuss inclusivity and diversity issues without being met with defensiveness, which is, I think, a huge thing for any marginalized folk in any workspace, whether that be tech or another industry. I don't want to feel tokenized as a queer Black woman. That is not my goal. Is not to be the only one in the room and feel like a star as a reason for it. That is how I would define being tokenized. And I don't want to feel like but I also don't want to feel like those parts of me are being ignored. Being very clear, I don't see color is very othering, and it is its own brand of continually marginalizing people. I don't want to feel like the work the work to create diverse work environments falls on me. And that is also a big thing for companies to just be aware of. I have, again, this is anecdotally, and this is just from personal experience. I have been places before where I have been told by people in charge, when I bring up the issue of diversity, that they are leaning on me to help them bring in more people of color as candidates, more queer people as candidates. That's unless you're willing to give me an extra paycheck on top of that, that's not my job. And it shouldn't be something that is put on the people of color or the marginalized folk in your workplace.
Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about a practical case study that happened at Canopy, and where we were when this conversation came to the forefront for us as a company back in 2019. And I think this will help to just kind of illustrate how we moved through it, what we had to look at, what practical steps we took, and then what the results were. So this is kind of a high-level overview of where we were as a company in 2019. Now, I want to step back from that just a little bit because, as I mentioned, I've been a tech and creative recruiter and HR person since the late 90s, early 2000s. And a common undercurrent in hiring for tech companies throughout my career has been that the world of tech is centered on young white men, and that there are no people of color in tech. And I use the air quotes because literally, like, if I can't find folks, it's okay. There just aren't people of color in tech, which of course is patently not true. But from the perspective of my own privilege as a white person, it was very, very easy to accept that and made it really easy to not have to work very hard to change that narrative. So I'm willing to admit that about myself today, which is really painful, but it's the truth. And I was able to look at a company like Canopy and say, hey, we're majority female. That's great. But even with a majority female age diverse makeup, we were historically very white as a company. And we also weren't having a lot of open conversations about changing that. So we kept the fact that we were female owned, run, led, and comprised front and center, and did some very basic things to try to work on diversity in terms of folks of color in our walls. So we aligned job postings with HBCUs a few years ago. We were always happy to see candidates of color. I lost my place. Where am I? Okay, there I am. But the thing is that just, the volume of diverse candidates reinforce the narrative that we've been kind of living under, that there just weren't a lot of candidates of color in tech. So if I'm being really honest, though, we didn't make any serious efforts toward recruiting a diverse candidate base or making our hiring practices of our company even more inclusive. our transformation toward a more inclusive culture started in earnest in late 2019, early 2020, first with COVID, but then it really ramped up almost simultaneously in the reckoning after the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. So I hate to use the term unprecedented times. We've heard that so much over the last 2 years, but really that's what we found ourselves in, internally and externally. And our employees and the candidates we interviewed were exhausted. They were emotionally exhausted and they were spiritually exhausted. Our leadership wanted to write a Black Lives Matter post on our company's blog, so sent me a draft of it to review. And just in looking at it, it became clear that the words were just platitudes and weren't enough anymore, honestly. So we had to take a good look in the mirror and ask ourselves, how do we put our money where our mouths are? How do we have hard conversations surrounding safety, inclusion, and intersectionality inside our company? And how do we extend those things to our own hiring and management practices? Beyond just hiring, how do we build a foundation that creates a space that makes a broad range of people want to apply, accept offers, and feel good staying for the long term? So we did a few things, and I'll get into that in a second, but just on a high level, I think one of the big things I want to say is that without buy-in from senior leadership, CEO, director level folks, this can't happen. It must be important to everyone in order for it to be a priority for the company. So I think in just approaching this idea generally, you have to be able to have the conversation on a very high level that we're not doing it right and we need to do it differently. So in this particular slide, for the first item, we talked about nonprofit groups that we could support and donate to in order to elevate marginalized voices in tech. And of course, our CEO was all about it, was totally interested in anything that we could bring to the table that would be that would help us to align ourselves in that way. For the second, we started to educate our leadership, CEO, COO, directors, managers, and then our employees to ensure we were prepared to have the tough conversations that Erika brought up with our current and future staff about our current and future state. And then for the third, we created some internal initiatives to address systemic oppression and hold a welcoming space that was set up to bring in diverse talent in an inclusive way. So in terms of hiring, toward the end of 2019, we changed the language that we used about diversity, equity, and inclusion on our job postings and on our website. So what I'm showing you here is something that we put on absolutely every application that we have through our applicant management system. This is a diversity alignment statement for all applications for all positions. It says, we are a company that seeks out a diverse, inclusive client base, dedicated to making the world a better place. Some clients do this via their mission, some do this via allyship, service to and connection with marginalized and disenfranchised communities. We are looking for candidates who share our passion for our clients and who are dedicated to the communities they serve. Does this sound like you? So folks who are applying need to click and agree with this to move through to the next stage of application. If they click no, it's typically an indicator that they're not enthusiastically aligned with our mission in this regard, and they're automatically disqualified.
So for me, a lot of things that I have to think about. One of the things I have to think about is what feels good in an interview. I mentioned this earlier, that being able to ask questions about diversity and inclusion and not feeling like I dropped a bomb in the room. I am fortunate that I just have a personality that I'm okay asking tough questions, but that is not everybody's personality. And part of that is also that the organization needs to make it clear that they are open to those kinds of questions. I have definitely been on interviews before where I've asked that, and everybody's face in the room got real contorted, and they weren't quite sure how to directly respond to that. So if you're an organization that doesn't have a lot of diversity and you know that, and you have a diverse candidate there, addressing that is a great way, or just being prepared to address that if the candidate should ask about that. Don't be taken off guard by that. Seeing companies directly address their failings, their learnings, and what their next steps are. So, for example, when I interviewed for Canopy, they were very direct and honest with me and said, we're not there yet, but we're working on it. And I can say that within a year, I could see very clearly how hard Canopy was working on building the diversity. And, it made me feel good as an employee to know and be able to see the work and seeing the results of said work. Also, like if you do have people of color at your job, I think it's a great idea to include them in the interview process. I will tell a really quick story about one time when I had an interview, and the manager that I interviewed with actually brought in a Black woman who was in a department that I would not have any interaction with whatsoever. But he brought her in the room and was like, I just wanted to let you know that there are other Black people who work here. I'm not saying that you should do that, but that was his attempt. And this was many years ago. I hopefully he's learned a little bit better since then. So maybe don't do it exactly that way. But, if you have people who are a part of the department, and including them in the interview process is really good at showing that you're willing to put people of color in a position to help make decisions, which is really important. No organization is perfect. Like, no organization is perfect. But transparency and willingness to try is important and always noted. Really, really hope people take note of those things.
So just to talk a little bit about inclusive hiring best practices. So we talked a little bit about, at least from my experience, we've done some postings with HBCUs, and that's great. But posting in spaces where diverse candidates might search for jobs is paramount. We need to remember that not everyone we're targeting is going to have the same access to college. They're not going to have the same access to technology. And that's a great rule of thumb for anybody. So we need to focus as well on social spaces like Black tech Twitter, Latinx tech Twitter, LGBTQ tech Twitter. It's great. Like, just do a few general searches for hashtags and you can find all kinds of alignment with the groups that you're looking to target for your organization. We also align ourselves with organizations like People of Color in Tech and Black Girls Code, who work to elevate underrepresented and underestimated folks. We work to make candidates feel seen by introducing our pronouns when we start an interview and offering accessibility options like captioning. Certainly we can do other things, in our Zoom interviews, accommodations, alternatives to our skills assessments, whatever makes the most sense, because we do have a relatively rigorous hiring process. And so if accommodations need to be made, happy to do that. Also, not everybody's comfortable. Some neurodivergent folks are not comfortable being on Zoom. That's okay too. Totally fine. But we do offer options for folks so that they feel comfortable and like we are seeing them entirely when we're interviewing them. We make asking hard questions safe by being ready to answer those questions honestly and intentionally. Like Erika said, we are absolutely willing to own it when we have no experience with something or we're trying to do better with something. And finally, we're not always great at it, but like I just brought up, one of the core values, at least of the company where I work, is own it. And we are totally willing to be wrong. We're willing to apologize for harms where needed, and we're willing to do the work to do better.
I love sharing anecdotes. So I'm going to share another quick one. And this is specifically about the first time that I interviewed with Canopy. And I had never been in an interview before where everyone who was in the interview introduced themselves with their pronouns as well. And that was significant because it instantly put at least one part of me at ease, and that was the queer part of me. So I felt I felt off the bat already more comfortable. It told me that it was safe for me to kind of open up a little bit about my queerness, about my pronouns, or about my life in general. So like one of the things that I shared with them was that my wife and I run a drag king troupe here in Washington, D.C. But I don't know that I would have felt that comfortable sharing that without that, what seems like such a small step that just opens up such a big door. And being, once that happened, I was also more comfortable in the interview overall, which then gave the people interviewing me an opportunity to see more of who I was and not just a polished, what I think they want to see version of me. I think I really opened up in the interview, and that allowed them to see my personality. And that it only benefits everybody in the room when you do just small things like that.
Okay, so I think it's important to just point out here that a company needs to have buy-in from its senior leadership, like I mentioned previously, in order to make inclusive practices work. So in other words, the director team, the CEO, all of your C-level folks need to agree that this is important for the company in order to move the needle in any meaningful way. So in addition to hiring practices, I want to highlight some foundational efforts just as a part of this case study that we've made in the past year toward working toward building a more inclusive culture overall. So aligning the company with inclusivity. So we've taken some time to look at our clients and to end a few relationships with clients whose values don't align with where we are today. We openly discuss DEI initiatives. So we've increased our transparency with applicants and employees regarding our current state and desired future state with respect to DEI initiatives. We hold space when times are difficult. So particularly in light of racial attacks on Asian and Black communities and ongoing dialogue regarding COVID, we openly hold space for employees to not be okay. And we do this in a number of ways. Most notably, we created, because we're a completely remote company, we created a Slack channel called Being Human. And the Being Human channel is a place where people can just go to not be okay. They can vent, they can just kind of go there for support. And it's been a great supportive resource for folks. Additionally, we do a 3 times weekly meditation practice. I've been a lifelong meditator, so I hold a 10-minute meditation 3 times a week for the folks that are interested, just to kind of center and get comfortable. And it's also a great way for us to just kind of talk about some of the principles that come up in guided meditation. We create intentional, inclusive internal mechanisms. So we internally support our staff who need accommodations. We ensure that closed captioning is turned on for all meetings. And we offer accommodations for remote workspaces where needed. We align our benefits with DEI practices. So as an example, we made Juneteenth an optional day of service holiday for US and Canadian employees. And now that it's becoming a federal holiday, I think I had looked to make sure that it was an ongoing federal holiday, but it will be an offered holiday for all employees in the US and Canada moving forward. We support organizations focused on elevating underestimated voices. We make monthly donations to both the Equal Justice Initiative and Black Girls Code. Then we create internal guideposts for inclusivity. There's a few things we've done to that end. We wrote an overview of best practices regarding inclusive language, and we train all employees, current and onboarding, and also all contractors on using inclusive language inside our walls. So as an example, we don't say you guys, we say you folks, or y'all. Y'all is great. I jokingly sometimes say my pronouns are y'all and all y'all, which is sometimes it's true. We talk about not using gifts featuring folks of color if you are not a person of color. We talk about the way that we tell jokes, terms that you should avoid, even in coding, using terms like master as an example, or white, XYZ, whatever it might be. So just trying to be really mindful of the language that we use. And we make suggestions for alternative language for all of those things, because sometimes people just don't know. And we try really hard to have a call-in culture. So we make sure to reach out to folks who use problematic language or examples. And we just discuss some options that they can use for different ways to get across what they're trying to say. We hold staff training on bias and inclusion. That's for all staff. We formed a DEI initiative and made it open for folks to opt in. We try to evolve and remain teachable. So we perform regular salary audits to ensure pay equity among our staff, particularly female staff and folks of color. Within our HR practice, I maintain a quarterly inclusion initiative report card to make sure that I'm measuring all of the things that we're doing very intentionally and recording any strides that we're making in that regard. And truthfully, like, all of this started in, I would say, February or March of 2020. So it's been a lot of work that we've done in that. Oh, yeah, evolve and remain teachable. That's that last slide there. You may be asking yourself kind of like, how did this effort change things? So I want to just kind of give you an apples to apples comparison of where we were in 2019 versus June of 2021. That's like where I took the most recent survey. So before I tell you how this worked out for us, I do want to say that where I'm falling short is on statistics for a few less visible aspects of diversity that we've worked to align ourselves with. So neurodiversity, folks within the LGBTQIA community, people with disabilities, among others. So please know that with respect to what I'm about to show you and aligning ourselves to these statistics, we're doing some high-level work to educate ourselves on ways to poll our staff so that it feels safe and respectful. I don't want anyone to feel like they have to opt into any of this for the purposes of us to pat ourselves on the back. I just, wanted to point that out here. So these are not fully inclusive statistics, but if we do this presentation again in the future, I'll work to update those stats so you can see what the numbers look like. So today we have about 53 employees. We're hiring at an exceptionally large rate. So, this number is changing a lot. But between those last statistics in 2019 and the statistics in June 2021, we've reduced by a few employees. We've grown probably by, about 27 or 28 employees. Our total amount of folks who identified as female or gender nonconforming grew by 8, increasing to 61%. Our total percentage of employees of color increased by 12%. We hired a number of employees over the age of 40, holding at 54%. But of our total employee base, the number of those folks over the age of 50 grew by 2%, which is excellent. The percentage of folks in leadership roles who identified as female or gender nonconforming grew by 10% as well, including our CEO, CTO, and COO. And we take regular sort of pulse checks on our employees to see about their happiness. And we have a 95% employee happiness rate. So I think overall we have a lot of work to do, but we have created a very strong, very intentional culture. And I think that's really shown in our growth overall.
As a result of this work, one of the things that needs to be answered is, how do employees feel about this? Off the bat, these kinds of changes make employees feel seen and heard. As an example, I actually had, I'm sure we are all Slack people. There may be a few people who are, I don't even know if Hip Chat is still a thing, but like, on other platforms, but for a while there on Slack, if somebody gave a thumbs up to something, the number would go up if other people clicked the thumbs up, but the thumb itself would not change. And I actually had somebody approach me and ask me, if you thumbs up something and it's a black thumb and I click on it, is that okay? And of course, they're always listening to us, and almost, I would, no lie, I would say probably in the next 2 weeks, Slack did an update, and now we see that we get kind of a collage of the thumbs with the varying skin tones that people have chosen for themselves. So that really solved that issue. And it was a really creative way to do it and a fun way to do it. But, I appreciated that somebody thought enough about that to even ask me about it. I definitely know that these kinds of changes will make employees feel safe and be able to express the desire to have more people that look like them in the workplace, and know that when it's mentioned that it's taken in and that there is work that is done based off of that kind of feedback. Being able to go to HR, I can definitely say with Erin, I feel safe going to Erin about things, and I have gone to Erin about things that are very sensitive in nature and involve other people that I work with, and in doing so, employees should not have to be re-traumatized by reliving the situation. The person should having that person be a source of help that can help you, that will hear you and help you process, which is really important. And having people around you, a part of having these very open policies also means that you're surrounded by people who do their best to understand you. And I've had so many really great conversations with people about this and feel like I was heard, and I feel like I heard them. And it's just a really great, warming, inviting environment.
All right, so I know we are pretty much out of time, but these slides, I'm assuming, will be available. I'll send the presentation on to the folks here at this conference so that they can send them out to you if you'd like them. But I wanted to thank the resources that we've used to do some research and learning along the way. This is a small but mighty list of podcasts, presentations, and books. And I'm grateful that these folks did a lot of labor to help us in this journey. So specifically, I'd like to acknowledge Aiko Bethea, Brene Brown, Abram X. Kendi, Janet Stovall, and Ijeoma Oluo. And these are some job posting sites and solution-based resources. But of course, these sources are just a Google search away. There are tons of great resources online. And in closing, I feel like we have come a long way, but we certainly have a lot of work to do and could do better. So please feel free to reach out anytime. I don't know if we have any time for questions or any kind of buffer there. So I think Tara was your name.
Yep, it is. Technically the session ends at noon, but we do have lunchtime now. So I would say we can definitely chat over lunch as people are interested. The one question in the chat so far is, will the slides be available for this talk?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you want to reach out, you can see my email address is just my first name at canopy.com, or Erika's is me@erikawithak.com. So please feel free to reach out to us. If you'd like a PDF of these slides, I'd be happy to send them to you. No problem. Thank you so much, Tara. Does anyone have any other questions? Happy to answer one or two.
I had a question, which is, it sounds like Canopy's leadership is pretty in line with these policies, right? So that helps a lot. I'm curious for you all, if somebody's at a place where the leadership isn't as engaged, are there ways that you would suggest for people to sort of start this process? Or kind of how would you get started if you're not sort of already in a good starting place, if that makes sense?
I think it really depends on the kind of role that you're in for just sort of how much you can move the needle yourself within a company, because really there's always education one can do for oneself, right? So we can always do the work ourselves. And I highly encourage any employees who bring issues to me to first and foremost look in the mirror and think about, like, where are pieces of your own privilege that you need to examine and look at and get comfortable with, and things like that. If a leadership is not in line with bigger company initiatives, I'm looking at you, Basecamp, it can be really problematic for the staff. They see and they hear what is and isn't being talked about, and sometimes will voluntarily opt out of working for a company like that. But certainly you'd need some kind of buy-in, I think, to have any kind of internal group where diversity, equity, and inclusion was a part of it. I don't know. Have you ever worked for a company where there hasn't been buy-in from leadership in that regard?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Question, but I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Like, did you feel like you had to do this stuff outside of work, or did you feel like there's anything you could do inside work in those cases?
To be honest with you, I was one of those people that opted out of working there as a result. It was actually the company that told me they were relying on me to help them build their diversity. There was, it became, long story short, it became promotion time, and they said that they weren't promoting people. And I did notice that, it was very obvious. They ended up promoting somebody, even though I had asked to be promoted, and it was a white woman that got promoted. But when I asked to get promoted, they told me that they weren't going to be promoting people. And that literally was when I started looking for a new job, like on the spot. Yeah. It was like, if they are not interested in having more people that look like me in more prominent manager positions. So I will find a place that is interested in that.
Yeah.
That has pretty much always been my experience as well. So I'm not surprised that the answer is like, you can't really change people. You can only find a place that wants you to be there.
But yeah. I have a question for Erin based off of your question, Tara.
Yeah, go for
it. In some of those situations where maybe leadership is not interested in, I guess, the more like moral aspect of inclusivity, do you think presenting numbers on how it improves work and improves a workplace and like the showing it from that perspective maybe is also an option, instead of, this is the right thing to do. If that's not working, then we can make more money if we do it this way.
I mean, certainly that could be a motivator. I think that most of the time when folks opt out of doing those things as a company, it's out of fear. Mm-hmm. The way that I've heard people couch it is, I don't want to get too political. But when we look at the fact that we're talking about humanity and not politics, that's like the big difference here. And I think that when a company is willing to lean in to the discomfort, mm-hmm. Really lean into the difficulty, lean into the ignorance. Like, I mean, for myself, like I can tell you for sure, my entire attitude, my entire knowledge base was based on privilege. And I just ignored that there was anything else because it was easier, and I was scared. And I was scared of what that would mean about me if I actually admitted that I didn't do something the right way or didn't own my own privilege in the right way, right? So when I finally just realized that it was actually a strength and not a weakness to do that, then that's when real learning and real connection happened, mm-hmm. I think, and real growth happens. So I think, most of the time what I've noticed is that companies will do it out of fear. They'll avoid the conversation out of fear and think if they just don't talk about it and focus on work, then it won't be a big deal, not realizing that it is the biggest deal to ignore it and hope that it goes away. It's just not the case anymore, especially now, particularly now. We have to just be willing to be wrong and to apologize and to learn and to grow together in a way that's meaningful. And I think it helps, and you tell me, I think it helps folks feel seen.
Yeah, sure.
When you're willing to say, like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm working on it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So yeah, I think ignoring it just makes it 100 times worse. And then, people say they're doing it for the right reasons, but it honestly is just avoidance, really. So I think it's just a willingness to be wrong, willingness mm-hmm. to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, any other questions?
That was so great. Thank you. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. So I'm going to just go ahead and declare this lunch hour. I think we're going to have a little staff changeover. Alana's going to be taking over for this track. And so I'm just kind of doing some housekeeping. At the top of the next hour, which is going to be noon Pacific time, that's GMT -7 for folks who are doing the math. We're going to have lessons from the dojo in this track, and we're going to have introduction to front end in the other track. And then after that, it's going to collapse into one room again. So thank you so much for your expertise. I really think it's really cool. I feel like not going to name names, but in the agency world, a lot of people act like it's impossible because they're small shops or they don't hire very quickly. And I just get so exhausted and exasperated at that attitude. So it's really cool to see somebody in the agency space really doing the work and getting it done. So thank you both so much for setting that example and sharing it back so that people can learn from you all. And with that, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and mute. We will be back in 50 minutes or so. And thanks so much for giving us your time.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye.